At the edge of an international border, at the edge of the Pacific, at the edge of innovation, community, education, and discovery, you're listening to At the Edge of It All, a University of San Diego podcast where USD experts speak on topics and stories that impact you and the broader community.
Hello there, I'm Lisa Martinez. Welcome to another episode of At the Edge of It All. Today we speak with Dr. Erika Garcia, who specializes in bilingual education, and she talked to us about the importance of dual immersion programs and also what language has to do with a person's identity in the classroom.
And I'm Elena Gomez, and we also learned a little bit more about her research on bilingual education and how she's helping teachers go into the bilingual education field and become better teachers while they're doing that. Let's take a listen.
Dr. Garcia, I'm very excited to have you on the podcast today because we're going to talk about all things multilingual. I didn't want to say bilingual because some people speak more than two languages. And this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. As a person who came to this country at the age of 9, speaking not a word of English and had to pick it up along the way, your expertise is this, right? So talk to us a little bit about where you began your journey.
Yes. I grew up in the 90s in Long Beach, California.
The best time, by the way, the 90s.
The 90s were the best. And unfortunately, it was also a really, really difficult time for a lot of our communities, very much like what we're observing, what we're witnessing today, a very strong anti-immigrant rhetoric that resulted in the passage of Prop 227.
Can you remind us what Prop 227?
Yes, Prop 227 passed in 1998, and it intended to eliminate bilingual education in public schools. It passed as a result, again, of this anti-immigrant sentiment. It forced schools to establish an English-only mandate in schools, with the exception of very few programs, such as the dual language immersion program. Which I'll speak about in a few. So most schools were forced to immerse their quote-unquote English learners in English-only classrooms. Now, I was really fortunate. So when I was 5, my mom went down to the district office to enroll me for kindergarten. And my mom was a Spanish speaker, migrant from Mexico, and she really wanted me to learn Spanish.
She was a teacher in Mexico, right?
She was a teacher in Mexico. And for her, it was really important that I maintain a connection to my language, to my culture, to my history. So when she went down to the district office, she was given the option of a dual language program, which at the time was it was a new program. And she opted for dual language. I was bused across town for an hour. It was an hour ride on the bus. On my first day at kinder, my mom me dio la bendición y me dijo, te veo a las 3, which means she basically said, I wish you a good day and I'll see you at 3 p.m. And I went off to kindergarten. It was the best choice she could have made for me during a time when I didn't speak a word of English, just like you. I was a Spanish speaker, and so it was a really smooth transition. I began then my journey in bilingual education. It was such a wonderful experience, had a lasting impact. I went on to be the first one in my family to graduate from college and to then become a teacher. I became a dual immersion teacher.
I know we'll get into this in detail later, but what did dual immersion mean when you went to dual immersion? And is it the same thing as now?
Yes. So in the 90s, dual immersion was a new model. Prior to Prop 227, there were many different types of bilingual education programs. A lot of them were transitional in nature, meaning that you were taught in Spanish or in another target language with the goal of immersing you in English, for you to learn English. But dual immersion was really a program that recruited native Spanish speakers like myself, or native speakers of the target language, because we do also have Mandarin and other languages represented in bilingual education, and also speakers of English who wanted to learn in that target language. So half of my class was Latinos like myself. The other half were white Caucasian students who wanted to add Spanish to their linguistic repertoire. And the goals are really to develop bilingualism, biculturalism, and also to develop what back then was called cross-cultural understanding.
How long did you do a program like this? And what do you remember as a kid about what it was like to be in a program like this? Was it a benefit? What are some of your thoughts of what you remember from that time?
Yes. I was really fortunate that my dual language program started in kinder and it extended to 8th grade. And we were a cohort. So all of my peers and I were in the same class together for 8-9 years. Bilingual education, as we know, is very beneficial. There's cognitive benefits, there's academic benefits. But what I really want to hone in on is the benefit to the student like myself, who didn't speak English, who needed that support in her native tongue. And despite that, I do have to say that despite the fact that I was taught in Spanish, the focus was academic Spanish, meaning that although I spoke Spanish, my Spanish wasn't considered academic for the classroom. And so oftentimes I was corrected by my teachers, many of whom were also Latinas, for not speaking proper academic Spanish. So although there are many benefits, I think when it comes to thinking about bilingualism, who benefits from bilingualism, right? Who is praised for their bilingualism? I think those are questions that we need to examine, especially as teachers working with multilingual learners.
And your research actually goes into that, right? You are looking into what it means to be bilingual depending on where you come from and what your background is. Can you talk to us about why your interest in that particular kind of research and the importance of that, understanding it?
I'm interested in this area primarily because of my lived experiences, but also I taught in dual language classrooms for 10 years prior to coming into higher education. And so much of what I saw in my own lived experiences, I witnessed as a teacher myself. How some bilingual learners are celebrated for their bilingualism, while others are expected to learn in both languages because of the expectations that we have as a society. And so that was one of the reasons, but most recently, it's become really personal to me. I have a 5-year-old who is going to be starting kindergarten in the fall. And I will be talking a little bit about his journey. I have noticed the same dynamics that I witnessed as a child and as a teacher then also play out in his own educational journey.
Using the research you've done, how are you working with future teachers who are interested in being bilingual or multilingual educators? What are you teaching them as they go out into the workforce as teachers and work in this space?
Yes. So at this moment in time, I work with teacher candidates who are going to be working in English-only classrooms for the most part. In previous positions, I worked with candidates who were going to be working with multilingual learners. But regardless of, the program of study, I think something that's really important for all teacher candidates is to recognize that all children bring cultural and linguistic assets to the classroom. Regardless of what languages they may speak, regardless of the cultures, the faiths, it's really important that we not only recognize those, but also find ways of leveraging them in the curriculum. So one of my areas of focus for candidates is to really get to know their learners. Who are those children who we have been entrusted to serve? And to really dive deeply into getting to know their families. And to begin to think about how do we center those histories, those cultures, those languages in our instruction, even if we're not speakers of those languages, even if we're not experts in every single child's language. I think we have to have a genuine interest in getting to know our learners and to really make them feel seen in the classroom.
Do you think the system is set up for that to happen?
No, the system isn't set up for that to happen. After Prop 227, which was eliminated in the early 2011, we adopted Prop 58, which repealed Proposition 227. And we said, now we are going to embrace bilingualism. And so now there is a growing number of dual language programs, not just in Spanish, but also in Asian languages. So there are efforts being made to increase access to language education. But I don't feel like we have made enough growth in ensuring that every teacher is ready to work with multilingual, bilingual learners from different places, coming from different places, especially being in a border town where we have children coming from the Middle East, from different communities that have been impacted by war. I think we can make a more intentional effort to ensure that we are equipping teachers to have all the tools they need.
How do you see things affecting students who are not properly placed, who are not, I don't know if the word is helped along with their bilingual needs in the education system?
So the question is really about placement. So as a former teacher, kindergarten teacher, one of my responsibilities was to assess students coming into our dual language program. And I'll speak about placement in general terms. Typically, when you go down to the district office to enroll your kindergartner, you will complete a home language survey in which you'll indicate whether you speak a language other than English at home. And in that survey, if you indicate that you speak Spanish or Portuguese or any other language, then you automatically get flagged. And, your application then is flagged in the sense that now your child needs to demonstrate that they are English proficient. And so most children whose parents speak another language at home will be assessed in that first year of kindergarten. I have implemented those assessments myself with kindergartners. Now, I don't know if you've ever been around 5-year-olds, but their attention span is short. 1 to 2 minutes, and then they're off, right? And so it is a really difficult thing to do with 5-year-olds. It's also really high stakes because if they don't demonstrate proficiency, then they have to, they're labeled. They get classified as English language learners. And what that means is that every year they'll need to be assessed for their proficiency in English until they get reclassified.
And the implication is that if you speak anything other than English at home, that you're not understanding?
Right, that you're not proficient. Now, we don't do that with our students who are monolingual English speakers. We don't assume that they're not proficient, right? We just assume that because that's their language, that they're proficient.
So what does the research actually shows about a child, and as you said, you have your own 5-year-old, who is speaking several languages at home? Does that make them less proficient? What does the actual data show?
So the data shows that obviously there's a lot of academic and cognitive benefits, right? But being bilingual, multilingual is actually not just beneficial in terms of the academics and cognitive benefits. There's also other benefits that I think are equally important that we don't often speak about, and that's the ability of these children, like my own, to be able to navigate different spaces and different relationships. My child has a relationship with his grandmother who lives in Brazil, and he communicates proficiently in Portuguese through a camera, through WhatsApp. And so those are skills that I think are real life skills that oftentimes don't get, that get neglected, that don't get recognition in a school setting.
What do you hope to see in bilingual, multilingual education? What would be some of the things that would be just sort of a perfect world and things that we should be considering for teachers listening out there to think about? I know you said get to know the students, right? That was one tip you had. Anything else you would recommend or things you hope to see in this space?
Yes, I'm deeply invested in this work because of my life experiences, but seeing my 5-year-old go through, similar systems, my hope is that if I'm speaking to his future teacher, that they will see they will see my child in his full authentic self, as a full human with all his languages, with all his ways of being. When we speak about language, we're not just talking about language, we're talking about a way of being and existing in the world that is different. We're talking about histories and ancestors who resisted colonization to keep our languages alive. And so I think it's really important that our future teachers or teachers who are working with multilingual learners, that we honor those histories, that we honor those languages, that we're genuinely curious to learn more. Learning another language can be really intimidating. I'm learning Portuguese, and I oftentimes find myself feeling a little bit overwhelmed, right? But it is the best feeling in the world when you meet someone who speaks that language and you can communicate with them and you can have a conversation. And so I encourage all teachers to be okay in discomfort, be okay in knowing that that learning, that we can continue to learn no matter how long we've been in the profession.
And through your research, I also want to talk just a little bit about the idea of taking away the pressure as well for the person learning those languages, right? You talk about a holistic approach.
I want to go back and highlight that Prop 227 denied a whole generation of children the opportunity to speak Spanish, to learn in Spanish and in other language in school settings. The message that conveyed is your language is not valuable, that you must assimilate into American ways of being. And so we do have a whole generation who was told bilingualism is not a good thing. And so there shouldn't be any shame against communities who opted, right? Because it's part of their survival. It's part of being able to survive in a system that's telling you this is not a good thing, right? Pressure. In schools, especially as in my experience as a dual immersion teacher and former student, oftentimes there's this pressure that if you're bilingual, then you must be a balanced bilingual, meaning that you need to be able to speak in both or 3-4 language in a balanced manner. The reality is that our brains are so sophisticated. And so as I'm speaking to you right now, sometimes I pull words in Spanish because that's part of my linguistic repertoire. Doesn't mean I'm not a balanced bilingual or that I'm not proficient in one or the other. It just means my brain is working differently. For my child, I wanted him to learn in 3 languages, but I faced a lot of resistance in that journey from my pediatrician, his pediatrician. When we went to have them see his pediatrician, he was about 18 months. The pediatrician was concerned that he wasn't meeting his speech milestones. And at that time, my child had started speaking when he was 6 months old. His first words were "Bom dia" and "Mamãe." And I was so proud because in my heart, I felt like I was doing the right thing. But when we went to speak to the pediatrician, there was a concern that he wasn't meeting the milestones, the speech milestones in English. That even though he was using all 3 languages effectively to communicate, the focus was really the English. The pediatrician wanted me to focus on English and suggested a speech therapy in English, which I respectfully declined because I knew that that he was going to have the time to develop his English skills. He was also born during pandemic, so very different times.
As they say in our Hispanic household, en la escuela van a aprender inglés, ¿no?
Exacto, en la escuela va a aprender. And so true, because now that's his dominant language. If anything, I'm fighting him to speak in Spanish, to speak Portuguese, because he's being raised in school systems that are, that value and prioritize English. And so the pressure is real for me. So what I've done is, instead of forcing something, I try to remind myself and remind him that our languages are connected to family members, that his vovô, his grandmother in Brazil, needs him to be able to communicate in Portuguese. And so we need to practice. His grandmother in Long Beach speaks Spanish and English. So, in order to communicate, we need to learn some Spanish. And so on our commutes to school, we oftentimes listen to music in both languages, and we try to keep it light and fun. We read, we do things where he can associate language with positive,
right,
thoughts, and not something that's forced.
And to wrap this up, this goes back to the holistic approach, right?
Yes.
Of embracing every child in school as they are, and supporting at whatever stage of their learning they are at, right? And you're doing that by teaching the future teachers, right?
Yes.
And so the hope is that, more classroom teachers, more classroom staff understands the importance of embracing every child, all of that child, not just a certain part of that child.
Absolutely. I always tell our teacher candidates, we meet every child where they are on their journey.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dr. Garcia, for being with us. We really appreciate all of this insight. It was amazing. Thank you
so much.
And if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to catch our next one.